My name is Evelyn Carter, and I am 73 years old. People see the wrinkles before they see the woman. They see the gray curls before they see the story. And most days, they don't see me at all. But once, long ago, I was impossible to ignore. I built a fortune with my own hands. Not inherited. Not gifted. Built. Brick by brick. Contract by contract. Sleepless night after sleepless night. I owned hotels, apartment complexes, and a chain of grocery stores across 3 states. My picture had been in magazines. My speeches filled ballrooms. They called me the Iron Magnolia. But what most people never understood, what they never wanted to admit, was that before the suits and pearls and polished shoes, I had been a poor black girl from the south side of a forgotten town. And I never forgot what it felt like to be treated like dirt. That memory stayed with me like a shadow that refused to leave. Even when I became rich. Even when I moved into a mansion with tall iron gates. Even when people smiled too wide and shook my hand too long. I always wondered, would they still smile if they thought I was poor? That question followed me for years. Until one morning, I decided to answer it. It was a Tuesday. Rain tapped softly against the tall windows of my bedroom while I stood in front of my mirror. My closet stretched across an entire wall. Rows of silk dresses, tailored jackets, designer shoes, hats arranged like museum pieces. I stared at them. Then I closed the closet door. Instead, I walked to a storage box at the bottom shelf, one I hadn't opened in years. Inside were clothes from another life. Old jeans. A faded sweater. A coat with frayed sleeves. Clothes I once wore when I counted coins before buying bread. I lifted the sweater carefully. The fabric felt thin between my fingers, soft from years of washing. A strange feeling crawled into my chest. Not fear. Not regret. Memory. I changed slowly, piece by piece, watching the transformation in the mirror. The pearls disappeared first. Then the silk blouse. Then the elegant skirt. Soon, the woman in the reflection no longer looked like a millionaire. She looked like someone people would step around. Ignore. Judge. Maybe even hate. I tied a scarf around my hair and removed the small diamond earrings from my ears. Without them, my face looked older. Tired. Invisible. I picked up an old purse, cracked leather, worn at the edges, and slipped a small amount of cash inside. Not my credit cards. Not my identity. Just enough money to survive the day. I took one last look at myself. Let's see how the world treats you now, I whispered. My driver, Marcus, waited outside as usual. He stood beside the sleek black car, umbrella in hand. When he saw me walking toward him, his eyebrows pulled together in confusion. "Ma'am," he said cautiously. I smiled. "Not today, Marcus." He blinked. "I'm taking the bus." "The bus?" he repeated, as if the word itself was foreign. "Yes," I said. "And don't follow me." He hesitated. I could see the concern in his eyes. But Marcus had worked for me long enough to know that when I made a decision, it stayed made. "Yes, ma'am," he said quietly. I walked past the gates and into the drizzle. For the first time in years, there was no luxury car waiting to carry me. Just the wet sidewalk, the distant rumble of traffic, and the feeling of being very, very small. The bus stop smelled like damp concrete and old cigarettes. 3 people stood there already. A young man in headphones, a middle-aged woman holding grocery bags, and an elderly white man leaning on a cane. I nodded politely. No one nodded back. I stood there in silence, clutching my purse. Minutes passed. Rain slid down the back of my neck, cold and slow. When the bus finally arrived, the doors opened with a loud hiss. People climbed inside quickly, pushing past one another. No one offered help. No one made space. I climbed aboard last. The driver glanced at me briefly, then looked away without a word. I dropped my coins into the fare box. No greeting. No smile. Just silence. I moved toward an empty seat, but as I approached, a woman placed her purse on the seat beside her, blocking it. Our eyes met for half a second. Then she looked away, like I wasn't worth the effort. So I kept walking until I found a seat near the back. That was the moment I understood something painful. Wealth protects you from many things, but not from memory. Because sitting there, surrounded by strangers who refused to look at me, I felt exactly like the girl I used to be. Small. Ignored. Unwelcome. The bus rolled into the downtown district. Tall buildings rose around us like stone giants. The streets buzzed with movement. People rushing, umbrellas colliding, footsteps echoing against wet pavement. I stepped off the bus and into the crowd. No one noticed me. That invisibility felt heavier than I expected. At first, I walked into a cafe. Warm air wrapped around me as the door closed behind my back. The smell of coffee filled my lungs. I approached the counter. The barista glanced at me, then immediately turned to serve the man behind me. I stood there, waiting. Seconds passed. Then minutes. The man ordered, paid, received his drink. Still no one acknowledged me. Finally, I cleared my throat. "Excuse me," I said softly. The barista sighed loudly, as if my existence had interrupted something important. "What do you want?" she asked. Not "good morning." Not "how can I help you?" Just irritation. "I'd like a small coffee," I replied. She rang it up without looking at me. "Cash only," she said. I placed my coins on the counter. When she handed me the cup, her fingers barely touched mine, as if contact might stain her. I carried the coffee to a small table near the window. As I sat there, watching people laugh and talk and sip their drinks, a heavy thought settled in my chest. This was the world I once lived in. And somehow, I had convinced myself it had changed. Later that afternoon, something happened that changed everything. Something I will never forget. I was walking along a narrow street lined with old buildings when I heard shouting. At first, I ignored it. Cities are loud places. Arguments happen every day. But then I heard words that made my stomach twist. Ugly words. Sharp words. Racist words. I turned my head. A group of young men stood near the corner, surrounding a woman. She looked to be in her 30s. Black. Thin. Wearing a worn jacket. Her hands trembled as she tried to walk past them. They blocked her path. Mocking. Laughing. One of them shoved her shoulder. My breath caught. Memories flooded my mind. Memories of insults, threats, humiliation from decades ago. I felt frozen. Powerless. Just like I had felt when I was young. The woman tried to speak. "Please just let me pass," she said. Her voice shook. But they only laughed louder. And in that moment, something inside me began to crack. Not anger. Not yet. Something deeper. Something darker. Something that had been sleeping for years. And it was starting to wake. I didn't know then that this day would end in tragedy. I didn't know that before the sun set, I would witness pain so deep it would change the course of my life forever. But standing there, watching that woman tremble under their cruelty, I felt something I hadn't felt in decades. Helplessness. And beneath it, a growing storm. One that would not stay silent for long. I did not move at first. My feet felt glued to the ground, like the pavement itself had swallowed them whole. The woman stood surrounded by those young men, their laughter sharp and careless, like broken glass scattered across the air. I could see her breathing fast, too fast, her chest rising and falling as if she had just run miles instead of a few steps down the sidewalk. "Please," she said again. "Just let me pass." One of the men stepped closer to her. He was tall, wearing a red jacket and a smirk that looked too comfortable on his face. "Why you so scared?" he mocked. "Ain't nobody touching you." But he leaned into her space anyway. Too close. Too threatening. The others laughed again. And I stood there. 73 years old. A millionaire. A woman who had spoken in rooms filled with powerful people. Yet in that moment, I felt like a frightened child hiding behind her mother's skirt. I hated that feeling. Hated it with every bone in my body. Finally, I forced myself forward. "Enough," I said. My voice came out stronger than I expected. All of them turned to look at me. Their eyes moved slowly, judging, measuring, dismissing. One of them snorted. "Look at this," he said. Another one. Another one. Not another woman. Not another person. Just another one. The words burned. "Leave her alone," I repeated. The tall one in the red jacket laughed loudly. "Or what?" he asked. That question echoed inside my head. Or what? What could I do? I had no guards. No status here. No wealth anyone could see. Just an old coat and trembling hands. But I kept standing there anyway. Sometimes courage isn't loud. Sometimes it's just refusing to step back. The woman glanced at me, eyes wide, shining with fear and something else. Hope. That look pierced straight through my chest. Another man stepped forward. "You better mind your business, old lady," he muttered. The words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. They carried weight. Danger. Threat. And suddenly, I realized how fragile the moment was. How quickly things could turn ugly. Very ugly. A man passing by slowed for half a second. Our eyes met. He saw what was happening. Then he looked away. Kept walking. That moment hurt almost more than the insults. Because silence is what lets cruelty grow. Finally, the woman pushed past them. Not running. Not screaming. Just walking quickly, head down, shoulders tight. I stepped aside to let her pass. The group laughed again but didn't follow. They had gotten what they wanted. Fear. That was their entertainment. Fear was their power. And for a long moment after she disappeared down the street, I stood there shaking. Not from cold. From anger. From shame. From regret. Because I knew, deep inside, that I had acted too late. Not fast enough. Not strong enough. And sometimes that difference matters more than anything else. I found her later that afternoon. Or maybe fate found me. I had wandered into a small park. A quiet place with peeling benches and thin trees struggling to survive between concrete paths. The sky had turned gray. Heavier than before. Like it was holding rain it didn't want to release. She sat alone on a bench near the far corner. Head down. Hands folded tightly in her lap. I hesitated before approaching. Then I walked slowly toward her. "May I sit?" I asked gently. She looked up. Recognition flashed across her face. "Oh," she said softly. You were there." "Yes," I replied. I sat beside her. Up close, I could see the exhaustion in her eyes. Not just from today, but from many days before it. "My name is Evelyn," I said. She nodded. "Danielle," she answered. Her voice was quiet, careful, like speaking itself required effort. For a while, neither of us said anything. Just sat there, listening to the distant hum of traffic. Finally she spoke again. "They do that all the time," she whispered. My stomach tightened. "All the time?" I asked. She nodded slowly. "Not always the same people," she said. "But always the same words." Her fingers twisted together in her lap. "I try to ignore it," she continued. "Keep walking. Keep working. Keep breathing." Her voice cracked slightly. "But some days," she whispered, trailing off. "Some days." I knew those days. Days when the world feels too heavy to carry. Days when every insult stacks on top of another until your chest feels crushed beneath invisible weight. We talked for nearly an hour. About small things at first. Work. Weather. Life. She told me she cleaned offices downtown at night. Minimum wage. No benefits. No protection from insults whispered behind her back. "They don't see me," she said quietly. Those words hit me hard. Because that was exactly what I had felt earlier that morning. Invisible. Disposable. Unworthy of kindness. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a wealthy woman pretending to understand struggle. I felt like a woman remembering it. Feeling it again. Living it again. As the sky darkened, she stood. "I should go," she said. "Where do you live?" I asked. She hesitated. Then gave a small shrug. "Not far." Something about her tone made my chest tighten. Uncertainty. Loneliness. Fear. I wanted to say something comforting. Something helpful. But words felt too small. So instead, I reached into my purse and pulled out a folded bill. "Please," I said gently. "Take this." She shook her head immediately. "No," she said. "It's not charity," I insisted. "Just kindness." Her eyes filled with tears. And that's when I realized how rare kindness had become in her life. Slowly she accepted the bill. "Thank you," she whispered. Then she turned and walked away. I watched her go, not knowing that would be the last time I would ever see her alive. The next morning the rain returned. Harder this time. Heavier. like the sky itself was mourning something not yet lost. I rode the bus again. Same smells. Same silence. Same cold glances. But my mind stayed fixed on Danielle. Her tired eyes. Her trembling hands. Her quiet voice. I wondered if she had made it home safely. If she had slept. If she had eaten. If she had cried. Those questions circled my mind endlessly, until the bus stopped near the same park where we had spoken. And that's when I saw it. Police cars. Flashing lights. Yellow tape. Crowds gathering. My stomach dropped instantly. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. I stepped off the bus and walked closer. Each step felt heavier than the last. A woman standing near the tape covered her mouth with shaking hands. Another man whispered to someone beside him. What happened? I asked quietly. No one answered at first. Then a young officer spoke. There was an incident, he said carefully. My heart pounded. What kind of incident? I asked. He hesitated, then spoke words that shattered something deep inside me. A woman took her own life early this morning. The world tilted. Sound faded. Air vanished. And deep in my bones, before anyone said her name, I already knew. It was Danielle. It had to be, because grief has a sound. And in that moment, I heard it screaming inside my chest. I stood there in silence. Rain soaked through my coat. But I didn't feel it. Didn't feel anything at all. Just emptiness. Heavy. Endless. Crushing. I thought about her words from the day before. They don't see me. And suddenly, I understood something terrible. When people are ignored long enough, when they are humiliated long enough, when they are made to feel invisible long enough, sometimes they disappear completely, and the world barely notices. But I noticed, and that noticing turned into something else, something darker than grief, something heavier than sadness, something that began forming quietly inside my chest. Not loud, not wild, just steady, cold, growing, like a storm gathering far beyond the horizon. And I knew deep down that nothing in my life would ever be the same again. I did not cry that morning. Not when the officer spoke. Not when the rain soaked through my coat. Not even when they said her name. Danielle Brooks. 29 years old. That was all they told us at first. Just a name and an age. As if a life could be summarized in a handful of syllables. I stood behind the yellow tape, staring at the place where people whispered and pointed, and shook their heads like it was just another sad story for the day. But for me it wasn't just a story. It was a face. A voice. A pair of tired eyes that had looked at me with quiet hope. And now she was gone. That night, I returned home. Marcus rushed to open the car door when I arrived. His eyes widened the moment he saw my face. Ma'am, are you all right? I stepped out slowly. The mansion lights glowed warmly behind him. The polished floors. The tall windows. The expensive silence. Everything looked the same. But I wasn't. I'm fine, I said. But my voice sounded hollow. Even to me. Inside, the house felt too large. Too quiet. Too clean. I walked into my bedroom and removed the worn coat I had been wearing all day. Underneath it, my shoulders trembled. Not from cold. From something deeper. Grief. Guilt. Rage. All tangled together like threads knotted too tightly to separate. I sat at the edge of my bed and finally let the tears come. Slow at first. Then unstoppable. They poured out of me like years of pain I had never fully released. Because Danielle wasn't just Danielle. She was every woman who had been mocked. Every person who had been ignored. Every soul pushed so far into loneliness that the world became unbearable. And somewhere inside me, a voice whispered, "You saw it happen. You saw the cruelty." And still the world kept turning. That thought burned. Days passed. But peace did not return. I attended Danielle's funeral quietly, sitting in the back row, dressed once again in my worn clothes. Her family stood near the front. A tired-looking mother. A younger brother who kept wiping his face with shaking hands. The pastor spoke gently about hardship and hope, about strength and faith. But all I could hear were echoes of laughter from that street corner. Those young men. Their smirks. Their careless cruelty. I remembered their faces. Every single one. That memory would not leave me. Not during the service. Not during the burial. Not even when the coffin lowered into the earth. Especially not then. Because as the soil covered the wood, a terrible thought settled into my chest. Danielle died alone. But she was not alone in her suffering. And someone had helped push her toward that edge. Not just the men on the street, but everyone who looked away. Everyone who stayed silent. Everyone who pretended not to see. Even me. That truth cut deeper than any blade. I returned to the city again a few days later. Same worn clothes. Same bus. Same cold stares. But something inside me had changed. I was no longer testing the world. Now I was studying it. Watching. Listening. Learning. I walked past the same street corner where Danielle had been harassed. And there they were. The same group of young men. Laughing. Joking. Living as if nothing had happened. As if their cruelty had no consequence. As if pain they caused had simply vanished into thin air. My hands trembled. Not from fear. From anger. A deep, heavy anger that had been building day after day. But I did not confront them. Not that day. Instead, I walked past silently. Because I realized something important. Violence does not only live in fists. It lives in systems. In silence. In neglect. In cruelty passed down like inheritance. And if I wanted justice, real justice, I needed more than rage. I needed purpose. That night, I sat alone in my study. Stacks of documents covered my desk. Property deeds. Financial reports. Legal files. The tools of my power. For years, I had used my wealth to grow businesses. To expand buildings. To increase profit. But now a different idea took shape. A dangerous one. Not violent. But disruptive. Transformative. Unforgiving. I leaned back in my chair and whispered aloud. No more silence. Because the truth was simple. Those young men were not the only problem. They were symptoms. The disease was deeper. Older. Rooted in inequality, neglect, and unchecked hate. And I had the power to fight it. Not with weapons. But with influence. With money. With relentless determination. Over the next months, I began making changes. Quiet at first. Then louder. I funded shelters in neighborhoods that had been ignored for decades. Places where women like Danielle could find safety. I opened job programs, real ones, not empty promises. Paid fair wages. Created training centers. Scholarships. Legal aid. Mental health services. Not charity. Opportunity. Because dignity doesn't come from handouts. It comes from stability. Respect. Support. And slowly, the city began to notice. Newspaper articles appeared. Television reporters requested interviews. They called me generous, visionary, powerful, but they didn't know the truth. None of this came from kindness alone. It came from grief, from rage, from a promise I made to a woman sitting on a park bench with trembling hands. One afternoon, nearly a year later, I returned once more to that same park. The bench where Danielle and I first spoke still stood there. Paint chipped, wood cracked, time-worn, just like memory. I sat down slowly, closed my eyes, and listened. The sounds of children playing echoed in the distance. Laughter carried through the air. Hope. Small, fragile hope. But real. I thought about the woman I used to be. The poor girl ignored by the world. The millionaire protected by wealth. The old woman who chose to see the truth again. And I realized something painful. Revenge would have been easy, quick, temporary. But change. Change was harder, slower, heavier, and far more powerful. Because hurting others would not bring Danielle back. But building something better. That might save someone else. Still, I would be lying if I said the anger disappeared. It didn't. Some nights, I still saw their faces in my dreams. Heard their laughter. Felt the helplessness return. But I learned to carry that anger differently. Not as a weapon. As fuel. Fuel to keep fighting. Fuel to keep building. Fuel to keep remembering. Because forgetting is what allows cruelty to return. Now, at 73 years old, I sit here telling this story with trembling hands and tired eyes. Not because I want sympathy, Not because I want praise, but because stories matter. They remind us of what happens when hatred grows unchecked. They remind us of the cost of silence. And most importantly, they remind us that power, real power, is not measured by wealth or status. It is measured by what we choose to do when we witness injustice. I could not save Danielle. That truth will haunt me for the rest of my days. But I made a promise to her memory. No one I can reach will feel invisible again if I have the strength to change it. And every morning, when I wake up and look into the mirror, I see an old woman staring back. Wrinkled, gray-haired, tired, but no longer silent. Because silence is what allowed cruelty to grow. And my voice, however old, however shaky, is the only weapon I will ever truly need.